Hi, I'm Nick Sheedy.
And I'm Kimberly Morgan.
You may recognize us as the genealogists for the PBS television show Finding Your Roots. We are so excited to address some of your own personal ancestry questions.
The Finding Your Roots community is incredible, and we are thrilled to be here to dig into some of your DNA mysteries.
With that being said, let's get going. I just recently discovered through a DNA test that I'm Swedish. This helped me do a little more digging, where I discovered that my Swedish relatives were part of a short-lived Swedish colony in what is now Delaware. What happened to its settlers once the colony was disbanded, and what records, if any, might exist about its settlers? So, first of all, there is a society for descendants of New Sweden, which the colony was called New Sweden, and it's just called the Swedish Colonial Society. And they have a website, colonialswedes.net. But yes, New Sweden was founded around 1638, and it was in the lower Delaware Valley in what's now Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, western part of New Jersey. But it was short-lived. It was only about 20 years until the Dutch came down from Manhattan and took it by force. But they didn't expel the settlers. The settlers stayed, but Dutch rule was even short-lived, because 10 years later, the English took over New Netherlands, which became New York. And so under English rule, more English settlers started coming in, and you had the colonies of eastern West New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware form, and largely Quakers came in at that point. And so the Swedes, who had lived there for a generation or two by this point, they were still there. And there are two record groups that I would like to point out. These are on my shelf. A guy named Jasper Donkerts. That's Jasper with a J, and Donkerts is Danckaerts. He was a Dutchman who visited New Netherlands, even though it was no longer New Netherlands at the time. He made two trips, one in 1679 to 80 and one in 1683, and he kept journals. You can see one journal is quite a bit thicker than the other, the first. But he visited the former Swedish settlements on the lower Delaware. He describes them, so you get a feel for what the settlement was like, and he even names some of the people he met. And the reason I bought these books is because my ancestor, William Biles, is probably one of the guys that ferried Jasper Donkers across the Delaware River in 1683. There's one other record group that would probably be important to look at that's kind of cool, and that is maps. A guy named Thomas Holme, Holme, was the first surveyor general of Pennsylvania, and he made lots of maps in the first few years of the colony. But the most important map that, well, in my opinion, is one chartered by William Penn. Said, hey, I got this colony. It's 1681 or 1682 or 3. I would like a map of all of the settlers that were here at the time of my charter, because William Penn got a charter for all the land, and he wanted to know who was already there and had a preemptive right. These people largely purchased land from the Indians or the Duke of York, and the previous settlers, he had to acknowledge their right. And so these maps go up and down the Delaware River, and you get the names of each and every settler and a little map of where their plantation or where their property was located and how many acres they owned. And what's really cool there is you can also see who lived in proximity, who were their neighbors. And my ancestor, William Biles, lived kind of next door to William Penn's Pennsbury Manor, and which is why William Penn called it a robbery on Pennsbury, because William Biles settled there prior to Penn's charter, and he basically lived there without paying William Penn for the land. So I hope that answers the question. And as far as records go, no births, no deaths, no marriages, no probate records. These predate any organizations. You have to wait until the colonies were established and the counties were established until you had courts for probate records. And for births, deaths, and marriages, maybe church records, but you don't get those until the late 1600s, so a generation or two after. And there are books published by the Swedish Colonial Society that include the old Swedish church records that survive, and Old Swedes Church is still standing in Philadelphia. So there you go. The last thing I'll mention is the Swedish settlement of New Sweden gives us one other pretty cool legacy, and that is they likely built the first of what we would recognize today as the frontier log cabin. They brought with them the technology to make the Swedish cope, which is where you lay the Lincoln logs together to build what we would recognize as a frontier log cabin today. So that's one pretty cool thing that New Sweden gave America.
After reading Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns, I've become intrigued by the Great Migration and parts of my family that are still in the South that we've lost contact with. It would be nice to find out more about those relatives we've never met. First, I want to say that you have great taste in books. Warmth of Other Suns is a fabulous book, and I highly recommend it. And in terms of identifying those family members who stayed in the South while members of your direct family were part of the Great Migration, I would recommend doing genealogical research on the extended family of the ancestors that you suspect were part of the Great Migration. You want to build out your family tree as fully as possible, and that means researching the siblings, aunts, uncles, and cousins of your direct family members. Try to identify them through every possible record, census records, newspaper articles, everything. Trace those lines out as fully as you can. Build your tree out as big as you can. The next thing you're going to do, if you haven't already done so, is to take an at-home DNA test like Ancestry. Once you get the results of your DNA test, you'll be able to see a list of your DNA matches. And your matches are likely people that are related to you through extended family members. And once you have identified those DNA matches, you can utilize Ancestry.com's messaging system to try to connect with those family members and hopefully learn some more information about the members of your extended family who are still in the South.
What is the best way to find land or business records for a town that's no longer there? It's the mining town of Pioneer, Montana. This person is looking for information about a boarding house in the 1880s. They have no idea where to start looking. Well, the good news is that no genealogical records that you might want to find were probably even filed or kept in the town that's no longer there. If there were any deeds, land records, mortgages, marriages, probate records, mining claim records, these would have all been filed at the county courthouse. So Pioneer, Montana is now located in Powell County, but in the 1880s, it was Deer Lodge County. So the records you're after are mainly going to be at the Deer Lodge County Courthouse, and that's in Anaconda. Now, you also have to keep in mind there's the town of Deer Lodge, which is now the county seat of Powell County. So what records are you after? If you're after deeds or mining claim records, business records, my question is what business records? Business records would typically be privately kept, like a ledger book, and they wouldn't be filed anywhere. So unless some relative said, hey, this is a cool old record, and they donated it to a museum or a historical society, that business record probably either does not survive or it is sitting in a box or under a bed in some distant relative's house. But you can find some details about businesses in newspapers, local newspapers, and many states have an archive or a collection of historic newspapers. And in Montana, it's held by the Montana Historical Society, which is a public agency. They have a website, mhs.mt.gov. And if you go to their website, you click through or you search for newspapers, they're going to have a list of all the newspapers they have. They're on microfilm. Some of them have been digitized. And they actually even, this is really cool, you click through and you can see a map of the state of Montana, and you can see by proximity where are the closest newspapers. And from Pioneer, the nearest newspaper was in Deer Lodge, And it was printed through the 1880s, and these issues survive. And right here it says, oh, they've been digitized, and they are at the Library of Congress's website in their Chronicling America collection. So at your fingertips, you now have access to not only images of the newspapers that you might want to search to see if there's any mention of this business, but these images have been, there's text recognition software that has gone through, and you can actually search by keywords on the website, which makes it way easier. Otherwise, you'd have to be thumbing through like as if you were reading the newspaper, page by page, column by column, issue after issue. And so those are the couple record groups that I would recommend. Newspapers for trying to find information on a business, and then any other records that might have been in that county are going to be at the county courthouse. So, and you're right, Pioneer it's not even a ghost town. I don't think there's anything left at Pioneer. When I went through there, I think it was just tailing piles and trees and a few cows.
My 81-year-old father was adopted, and we're having difficulty getting started finding his actual birth parents. What is the best way to start? In terms of identifying or finding unknown family members or biological family members, there's two things that we recommend. And the first is to join a Facebook group that our DNA expert, CC Moore, founded called DNA Detectives. If you go on Facebook, you can search DNA Detectives by CC Moore. It's a fabulous Facebook group. It's private, and it's a wealth of information about how to navigate the journey of finding and identifying your unknown family members. At the top of the page, there are tabs, and on the far right, there's a tab titled Files. Click on that tab and you will find a list of documents available that have all the information you need compiled. One of the files is called Recommended Testing Paths. The recommended testing path on DNA Detectives does suggest taking multiple DNA tests, which can be frustrating for some people, but think of it as fishing. If you're standing alone on a pier with one fishing pole, one fishing line, you're not going to catch as many fish as the person that has a boat pulling a giant net behind them. And when you're looking for unknown family members, you want to be the person that's on the boat with the net dragging the water. And testing through multiple companies, taking multiple DNA tests, gives you that boat with that net. You're trying to find as many possible DNA matches as you can, because the more DNA matches that you have, the better the chances are that you will be able to identify and find your biological family members. Once you've taken a DNA test, and once you've gotten your results, if you need help understanding how to interpret those results and identifying your family members, you can request a search angel through DNA Detectives. A search angel is a volunteer who will help you interpret your results and navigate contacting possible family members. They do the work for free, and there's a lot of really amazing search angels available through DNA Detectives.
All right, this question is really good. When looking at one side of my family, I found census records that are somewhat confusing. Until the mid-1950s or 60s, many people are listed as Black or mulatto, even on birth certificates. Then suddenly, they're listed as white. Often the same family members who were listed as otherwise on previous censuses. These members of my family are certainly people of color, and according to various DNA tests, I am between 10% and 15% of African descent. Who decides race on these censuses, and is this common? Well, on the censuses, the enumerators were actually limited to very specific designations. So if you go back to the 1800s, 1870 and 1880, for black, white, or mixed race, you really had three choices: black, white, or mulatto. You jump up to 1890, all of a sudden you get black, white, mulatto, quadroon, and octoroon. But the 1890 census is almost entirely lost in a fire. It's irrelevant. But then you jump to 1900, and the Census Bureau decided that people were either black or white. Now, when you jump up to 1910, 1920, you get the option of mulatto again. And then 1930, it goes back to black, or white. And I think in there somewhere, Negro came in as an option. The point is that you're limited. The census enumerator was limited what he could put in that spot. And who decides what goes in that spot? Well, the census enumerator's ultimately the person making the note in the race column. And so sometimes he would have just written down what he saw. And you can tell in some censuses, if there's the option for mulatto, and this census enumerator goes white, white, white for a family, and then black, mulatto, you can tell that census enumerator was careful and cared a little bit about being as precise as he could. Then you see the census enumerator and it's all black or white. And that person saw the world in a pretty black and white way. And you can tell they just weren't as careful sometimes. But ultimately, it's the census enumerator that makes the call for censuses. And often it's just in the eye of the beholder. And really that kind of strikes at the heart of one of the things we do here at Finding Your Roots. What defines race? What defines this racial identity? And, you know, if it's just a census enumerator deciding to check W or B or M, sometimes it can be a little capricious. I imagine occasionally that if there was a question in the enumerator's mind, he could have asked, and somebody, whoever the informant was for that household, could have said, oh, we're black, or oh, we're mulatto, and they could have explained, and the information came down. But you never know who provided the information that goes onto a document. And then occasionally you get somebody who's in a boarding house, and maybe they weren't even there, and the enumerator never saw them, and the keeper, the innkeeper, or the boarding house keeper, you know, had some notes that weren't very good. But ultimately, it's the enumerator that writes down race, and often it's just in the eye of the beholder.
That was really fun, and we hope that we were able to answer some of your lingering ancestry questions.
Make sure to check your local listings for new episodes of Finding Your Roots on PBS. Hope to talk to you all again soon.